part of the Press Play Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome back to the Full 40 College Basketball Podcast on the Press Play Podcast Network. I'm your host, Ben Billman, and I am ready to take you through another great week of college basketball. We are only 3 weeks away now from Selection Sunday, the best day of the year, when we find out who's in the NCAA tournament and who just misses out on the NCAA tournament. So today I'm going to talk about a few different topics. In the first half, I'm going to review what's happened over the last week or so in college basketball. And in the second half, I'm going to take a closer look at bubble teams and what I like and what I don't like about them going into the last few weeks of the season. But before I start looking at some of the results from the last week, I first want to touch on the court storming incident that took place at Wake Forest on Saturday. For those of you that might have missed it, number 8 Duke went to Wake Forest to play a road game on Saturday. Wake Forest ended up winning by 4, and in the aftermath of the win, as soon as the buzzer sounded, all the students from behind both baskets, all Wake Forest students, stormed the court, and as they were storming the court, Duke's center, Kyle Filipowski, in some sort of connection or physical contact with one of the students, ended up spraining his ankle in the process. Now, I have not heard if anything more than that happened, but at the time after this incident, he had to be helped off the court. He was definitely limping, and the students continued to come on the court as he was being helped off. It was a wild incident, but it is definitely one that we see in college basketball time and again. Anytime a team that is favored loses on the road, more than likely you're going to see a court storming. We see it almost all the time with teams in the top 5, maybe the top 10, or in rivalry matchups. So real quick, I just want to touch on this. It's a pretty controversial topic. But in my opinion, this is one of the things that makes college basketball or college sports in general special, is the passion and the drive of the fans and the students. I do not want to see court storming go away. It's one of the most exciting things to see in college sports when fans feel that their team has just accomplished something that maybe they have not had the best season, or maybe it's a win that puts them back into contention. But it's one of those things that college sports has that professional sports does not have and makes it special. So I have heard 2 separate arguments for this. The first one being that court storming needs to stop altogether. And I think that is just wrong. I think there needs to be court storming, but I do think that regulations and rules need to be put in place to make it more safe for the opposition as they leave the court. I think some of the ideas that we might need to consider, first of all, from a referee standpoint, if it's evident that the team in the opposition is going to lose the game and it becomes impossible for that team to win at the end, which means that it's probably more than a 2 or 3 possession game with less than 10 seconds to go. In my opinion, it might be good to clear the bench and then also tell the players on the court, as soon as you hear that final buzzer sound, run off the court as quickly as possible. I think that's one solution that might help. Another one would be somehow making it clear to the students, we have to give the opposition time to get off the court before you storm the court. Now, this one would be hard because when you have hundreds of students who are desperate to get on the court. This could easily create chaos in the stands where they start getting way too close together and crushing themselves as they try to get to the court. So that's a tricky part as well. A lot of conferences have implemented some sort of fine to the home team where, depending on how many times it's happened, the fine continues to increase. One thing that I've heard, and it's probably a good idea, is definitely to continue to increase the fines to these home teams to the point that it's very detrimental to get these fines. But one thing, if I were an away team, that I would be very clear about from a coaching standpoint is once that final buzzer sounds, you need to sprint off the court. Now, I don't necessarily blame Kyle Filipowski for what happened, but if you watch the replay, it becomes very clear that he is in no hurry to get off that court. And from a college basketball player's standpoint, you know it's coming, especially if you play for Duke. So, the players are owed safety. They are owed a chance to get off the court safely before the fans come on. But they also need to know that those fans are coming, and it's going to be chaos in just a couple minutes or a couple seconds. So I think overall, not that I blame Kyle Filipowski or Duke, but you've got to be prepared for it. If you're Coach Shire, you have to know. And moving forward for home teams, the fines need to be increased. The penalties to the students need to be enough that they don't want to come on the court right away, and that could include suspensions or something that comes along with those penalties, maybe not allowed to come back after that. But it's a very critical thing that needs to be looked at. I don't know what the answer is, but the NCAA needs to do something about it without ending it, because it is so exciting for fans to enjoy their team winning. I'll have more thoughts on that as the season goes on, and if the NCAA or conferences decide to put any sorts of rules in position, I will keep you updated on that. But definitely something to watch over the last few weeks of the college basketball season. Okay, so getting into the last week in basketball, pretty incredible. 3 of the top 4 teams in the country lost, and the other one, Houston, was taken to overtime by Baylor. So it was a lot of excitement, lots of upsets, and we are seeing as we get closer to the end of the year, it's really getting tight at the top. And going into last week, I felt like Connecticut and Purdue had kind of solidified those top 2 spots and separated themselves from the rest of the field. But after seeing this last few weeks when both of them lost, along with Arizona losing, it's definitely tightened things up. I do agree with Houston being number 1 in the country. They are on the hottest streak right now. They do lead the Big 12, and so I do think that they deserve the number 1 spot right now. I don't think they're the best team in the country, but based on where we are right now, they probably deserve that number 1 spot overall. A couple other things in a couple other conferences. First of all, in the American Athletic Conference, ranked for the first time this season is South Florida. And South Florida has probably been the biggest surprise in college basketball all year. They sit at 21-5, 14-1 in conference, number 25 overall. They've won 13 games in a row. And you just look a couple weeks ago, the American Athletic Conference has teams like Florida Atlantic, SMU, Memphis, UAB. I think a lot of people thought that the conference champion would come from that group, but instead, South Florida has a 3-game lead in the conference. With only a couple games left, and at this point, it looks like they're going to win the regular season championship. Now, one of the problems with South Florida is that they do not have the best strength of schedule, which is going to hurt them entering their conference tournament, and it is possible that they could win the regular season championship, and that may not be enough to get them in the tournament. So that is something to keep an eye on. The other thing in the American Athletic Conference is with Florida Atlantic, a team that was the Cinderella darling last year, has been in the top 25 all season, but has now been on a streak where they have been not been playing as well. They are currently 21-7, 11-4. I think they are safe to get into the tournament, but if this losing streak and this trend continues, they are going to be right on the bubble on Selection Sunday, so they need to be very careful. In the Atlantic Coast Conference, UNC and Duke both in the top 10, North Carolina at number 9, Duke at number 10, and then there are a handful of teams that are on winning streaks or look like they are creeping into things, especially Clemson, as I mentioned, Wake Forest knocking off Duke, Pittsburgh, Syracuse, NC State. It's gotten a lot tighter in the ACC, but at this point, the champion is probably going to be between North Carolina and Duke, and we'll see what happens there. The Big 12 continues to be the toughest conference in the country. It wouldn't surprise me to see 8 or 9 teams from this conference make it to the NCAA tournament. But as I mentioned, Houston currently leads the conference standings by 1 game over Iowa State. And then right below that is Kansas with 2 games back. And then we've got just a number of teams in the middle of the conference that include Texas Christian, Baylor, Texas Tech, Oklahoma, and BYU. All those teams are at 500 or better in the conference, and they all look like they're going to be tournament teams. And I'll talk about a few of those teams in the second half as I look closer at the bubble. But looking beyond that, we have teams that are below 500 in the conference, but I feel like still have a chance based on their strength of schedule and just the overall play I've seen from them this year. And that would be Texas and Cincinnati. I think both those teams still have a chance, but they need to start winning some conference games desperately to get back in the hunt. Moving down to the Big East. The Big East has been a 3-team race all season between Connecticut, Marquette, and Creighton. Right now, Connecticut fell to number 3 after their loss over the weekend. Marquette is at number 5, and Creighton is at number 12. But Seton Hall is on a 3-game winning streak, and they have currently moved into 3rd in the conference ahead of Creighton. They're a very hot team right now, and it would not surprise me to see them continue to rise. They're currently unranked, but again, it would also not surprise me to see them ranked here in the next couple of weeks. Below that are some bubble teams in Providence, Villanova, St. John's, and Butler, and those teams all need to get on winning streaks badly over the next couple of weeks, and I will also touch on some of those schools in the second half. The Big Ten continues to be dominated by Purdue. I think Purdue has almost at this point locked up a number 1 seed. They sit at number 2 in the AP poll. But if there's one team that could catch them, it would be Illinois, who sits at number 13 right now. Purdue has a 2.5 game lead in the conference. They're 25-3, 14-3 in conference. They still, as of right now, have yet to lose at home. One of the best home court advantages in the country. Below that, Wisconsin, Nebraska, Northwestern all look like they're going to be in the tournament. They all have double-digit wins already in the conference. Some really good wins overall. Nebraska has won 4 games in a row. And below that, a couple bubble teams, Michigan State, Minnesota, Iowa, who are all sitting right around 500 in the conference. And again, I'll talk about some more of those schools here in a minute. Now, pretty surprising at the bottom of the Big Ten, 3 of the best teams historically in the Big Ten sit at 12, 13, and 14, the last 3 spots. That would be Indiana, Ohio State, and Michigan. Ohio State has already fired their coach, Chris Holtmann, and it wouldn't surprise me if Indiana and Michigan did the same. This would be historically significant for these 3 programs, that 3 of the best programs of all time in the Big Ten are all looking for new coaches in the offseason. I think Juwan Howard, it's almost a lock that he's out after this year, and Mike Woodson at Indiana is desperately on the hot seat here leading into the final weeks of the season. Okay, looking at a couple other conferences. First of all, the Mountain West Conference. They continue to struggle to keep teams in the top 25, but they continually have multiple teams rotating in and out at the top of the conference. Within the top 7 teams in the conference, there are only 2.5 games separating those teams. Right now, Utah State, who is at number 22, and Boise State, who is unranked, sit at the top of the conference at 10-4, with San Diego State at 10-5 and number 20 in the country. The one thing that we are seeing in the Mountain West Conference is just a lack of consistency from the top tier. And I don't mean that they're not playing well, but there are just no winning streaks happening. It seems like every time you think a team is on a winning streak and a hot streak, they lose and fall right back into the middle of the pack. I'm still pretty confident that the Mountain West will get 5 teams, and it's possible that they get 6 teams in the NCAA tournament. But at this point, it's just hard to tell who those teams are going to be. San Diego State is number 20, Utah State 22, and that's it for ranked teams in the Mountain West. Moving down to the Pac-12, it is still very, very possible that the Big 12 goes through this season and only gets 1 team in the NCAA tournament. Arizona at this point is a lock, 21-6 overall, 12-4 in the Pac-12, but they are coming off a loss to number 19 Washington State, who is only half a game behind Arizona at this point. The problem with the Pac-12 is that there is just a lack of parity in the Pac-12. Arizona and Washington State sit at the top, but beyond that, there are just a bunch of middling teams who have struggled with consistency all year. And it's too bad to say this, but in the last year of the Pac-12, we may not see a team go deep into the NCAA tournament, and the conference overall may go out with much fighting when it comes to college basketball. A couple teams to keep an eye on would be Oregon, Colorado, and Utah. But again, all of them have been very inconsistent. And other than Colorado, who's on a 2-game winning streak right now, Oregon and Utah lost their last game. So again, it's going to be very intriguing to see in the Pac-12 if any teams can rise up to the level of Arizona and to an extent, Washington State. Moving on to the Southeastern Conference, the SEC. For a long time this season, Alabama held the top spot. They lost over the weekend. They fell to number 14 overall. And now all of a sudden, Tennessee, number 4 in the country this week, is now tied at 11-3 in the conference with Alabama. And right behind them, a game behind in the conference standings, number 11 Auburn and number 18 South Carolina. Number 24 Florida and number 16 Kentucky sit at 9-5, and then a handful of bubble teams, Mississippi State, Mississippi, and Texas A&M, all sitting right around 500. The most intriguing of those teams is Mississippi State, who has now won 5 games in a row and looks like they are headed for a spot in the NCAA tournament. And then finally, a discussion that we are going to have and an argument that's going to be continual for the rest of the season is in the West Coast Conference. Right now, St. Mary's is in the lead. They're still undefeated in the West Coast Conference at 14-0. They've won 15 games in a row overall. They definitely look like the best team in the West Coast Conference, but right behind them at 12-2 is number 23 Gonzaga. Gonzaga has now won 6 games in a row. They're 22-6 overall. The biggest controversy with them, though, is they only have one quad one win when it comes to the statistical and computer measurements in college basketball, the ones that the committee will use on Selection Sunday. So, when it comes to the strength of schedule, Gonzaga has had a very tough schedule, but every game they've had against a top team, they've lost, except for one, and that was at Kentucky just a couple weeks ago. So does Gonzaga deserve a spot? That's going to be a topic of debate up until Selection Sunday. I believe they deserve to get in. Maybe that's a little biased because of the success they've had over the last couple seasons, making the national championship game in 2021 and the Elite Eight last year. But it is possible that this could be the first time in a long time that we don't see the Gonzaga Bulldogs in the NCAA tournament. They're probably 1 or 2 losses away from being out. So that's a little update on what's going on in college basketball, some of the teams that are rising and falling. I'll be back in just a couple minutes to talk about what I like and what I don't like about a handful of bubble teams.
Hi, everybody. It's John Tellage from the Guardians of the Land MLB podcast. Be sure to hop on with us to follow all the dramatic developments of the reigning American League Central Division champions. From game analysis to interviews to keeping tabs on who could be the next breakout star. We'll have that and much, much more right here. It's the Guardians of the Land MLB podcast on the Press Play Podcast Network. Subscribe here and join the fun.
Hey everybody, it's Sam Amico from Cavs on the Break NBA podcast. Be sure to give us a listen for all your Cleveland Cavaliers recaps, analysis, breakdowns, draft talk, free agency. The list goes on and on. Give us a listen, Cavs on the Break NBA podcast.
Welcome back to the second half of the Full 40 College Basketball Podcast on the Press Play Podcast Network. So in the second half today, I want to take a look at a handful of bubble teams across college basketball. Some of the good, some of the bad, what I like, what I don't like, and then also a prediction of whether or not I think this team is going to make it to the NCAA tournament. I'm going to move kind of fast here. I've picked 3 teams from the Power 6 conferences each. And then I also included in one team, Gonzaga, at the end. So I have 19 teams that I need to run through. I'll give about a minute to each team. And these are current statistics. These will change over the next week or two. So definitely keep an eye on these teams and see what happens over the next week or two. All right, so I'm going to start in the ACC. Let's start with Wake Forest. They just came off a win over Duke at home. They sit at number 25 in the NCAA net rankings, so those are the good. The bad is that they are only 7-6 over their last 13 games. They do have 10 conference wins and 18 wins overall. I think Wake Forest will be in at the end of the season. They have some winnable games down the stretch, and they look like they're one of the 4 best teams in the ACC. I will put them in even though there are some concerns heading into the last few weeks of the season. Second team from the ACC is Pittsburgh. 18-9. They do have 9 wins in conference. They are 6-1 over their last 7 games. That looks great. And they continue to move up in the ACC. They'll finish in the top half, and they do have that winning record. The problems, the things I don't like, they're number 47 in the net rankings and only 3-5 in quad 1. Again, quad 1 are the teams at the top of college basketball. Usually you want to have at least 5 or 6 wins in quad 1 to look good and feel comfortable on Selection Sunday. Do I think Pittsburgh is going to be in at the end of the year? I would say no. Pittsburgh looks like they're on a hot streak right now, but I think it's too little too late for them. So I'm going to say no on Pittsburgh. The third team out of the ACC is Virginia. The good things are they're 20-8 overall. They've hit the 20 win mark, and they have 11 wins currently in the ACC. That looks great. But some of the things that worry me, first of all, they're 1-3 over their last 4 games. That's not very good. They sit at 49 in the net rankings. That's borderline. And they're only 3-4 in quad 1. Those really scare me, but I do think that by the end of the year, Virginia will get in. Even though they seriously struggle to score the ball, they have one of the best defenses in the country, and I think they'll sneak into the NCAA tournament. All right, moving on to the Big East. Seton Hall, currently 18-9, 11-5 in conference. That's great. They're in the top 4 in the Big East. They are 5-1 over their last 6 games, so that looks great as well. The biggest problem for Seton Hall is their net ranking, which is number 61 in the country. And just for reference, usually teams in the top 30 to 35 are locks for the NCAA tournament, so being at number 61 is a little bit worrisome at this point, mainly because they have not played that tough of a schedule outside of the Big East. They do have 5 quad 1 wins, and they do have a chance to get more, but they need to pick up more quad 1 wins to feel comfortable. I think Seton Hall will be in, but it's going to be close. Providence, 18-9, 9-7 overall. The good thing is that they have a winning conference record. They have won 4 of their last 5, so those are positive, but on the other side, they only sit at number 55 in the net rankings, and along with Seton Hall, they have 5 quad 1 wins. They need to pick up a couple more quad 1 wins, and again, the same with Seton Hall. Their non-conference schedule just was not very strong. Okay, and then the last team in the Big East, St. John's. Some of the good. They just came off a big win over Creighton, and they are also number 44 in the nation in the NCAA net rankings, which isn't too bad. They also have 8 quad 1 and 2 wins combined, which looks very good. The problems for St. John's are that they already have 12 losses overall. They're only 8-9 in the Big East, and they're only 4-8 over their last 12 games on their season. I think St. John's gets left out in Rick Pitino's first season in charge of the Red Storm. All right, moving on to the Big Ten. Michigan State, currently 17-11 and 9-8 in conference. Obviously, the 11 losses that they have are very worrisome at this point in the season. They are only 3-3 over their last 6 games, which is definitely not something you want to see in the home stretch of the season. And they are also only 3-7 in quad 1. What they do have working for them is that they are number 24 in the net rankings. And even though they only have 3 quad 1 wins, they have played 10 quad 1 teams overall and have one of the toughest schedules of any team in the Power 6 conferences. At the end of the day, I think Michigan State gets in, but they really need to perform at a higher level in these next couple of games. Iowa sits at 16-12, 8-9 in conference. Obviously, the 12 losses overall and a losing record in the Big Ten does not look good. They have played 10 quad 1 games. They are only 2-8 in quad 1. But again, 10 games against quad 1, 1/3 of their schedule basically, is pretty solid when it comes to strength of schedule. They do sit at number 60 in the net rankings, which is worrisome. But when you look at their finishing schedule over the last 3 games, it would not surprise me to see them go 3-0 and head into the Big Ten tournament with a lot of momentum. At the end of the day, I do not think Iowa gets in, but they have made a nice spurt here at the end, which I think bodes well, maybe for a run in the Big Ten tournament. Finally, in the Big Ten, Northwestern, 19-8, 10-6 in the Big Ten. They do have double-digit Big Ten wins, which normally means you're going to get into the tournament. They've won 4 of their last 5, and they have 9 quad 1 and 2 wins combined. The things that concern me, first of all, they're number 53 in the net rankings. That's borderline, and mainly because they did not play that tough of a non-conference schedule. Northwestern, I do think they get in, but they cannot have a lapse here at the end of the year. They need to pick up 1 or 2 more wins to feel comfortable on Selection Sunday. All right, moving on to the Pac-12. As I mentioned before, the Pac-12, at this point, I don't know if they can get 3 teams in. Right now, I think Arizona and Washington State have to feel pretty comfortable. But there are 3 teams here that, if they get hot, maybe they sneak in. But here they are. First of all, Oregon, 18-9 overall, 10-6 in the Pac-12. They do have 10 wins in the Pac-12, which is really, really good. And they do have 3 home games left in the finishing of the conference season. The things that worry me about Oregon, number 63 in the net rankings, and only 2 quad 1 wins. So for them to get in, they need to get past the 20-win plateau and maybe win out and make a run in the Pac-12 tournament. But in the end, I don't think Oregon gets in. Colorado, 18-9 and 9-7 in the Pac-12. They do have 2 wins in a row, and their 4 games remaining look very winnable. They also sit at number 34 in the net rankings, have had one of the toughest strength of schedules outside of the Pac-12. But the problem for Colorado is that 9-7 in conference does not look that good right now in a very weak Pac-12. And overall, in quad 1, they are only 1-5. They've played 6 quad 1 teams, and 5 of those 6 have been losses. I don't think Colorado gets in to the NCAA tournament. Next up is Utah. This is probably the toughest decision for me when it comes to whether they get in or whether they are left out. Utah right now, 16-11, 7-9 in the Pac-12. First of all, the losses. 11 losses and a losing record in conference. That looks terrible. They are 2-6 over their last 8 games. They're on a losing streak. But what they have working for them is that they have 8 quad 1 and quad 2 wins combined. They are number 54 in the net rankings, which is pretty incredible when you think about their record and the last 8 games going 2-6. The thing that Utah has working in their favor is that they have a very favorable last few games of the season. If they can somehow get to or above or at 500 in conference and add a few more quality wins and make a run in the Pac-12, I think they might sneak in if they do that, but I don't think they do. I think Utah is one of the first teams out when it comes to Selection Sunday. All right, moving on to the Southeastern Conference, the SEC. First of all, South Carolina has the best record on this list of teams that I'm examining. First of all, South Carolina, 22-5, 10-4 in the SEC. Again, the numbers, the overall record, the winning percentage speak for themselves. 22 wins and double-digit wins in conference looks great. The problems for South Carolina are that they've lost 2 of their last 3. That worries me. They're only number 48 in the net rankings, which is a little bit surprising based on their record, and that's mainly because they played a very poor non-conference schedule. And they do also have 2 quad 3 losses, and those look very poor, that 2 of their 5 losses were to low-end college basketball teams. At the end of the day, I do think South Carolina gets in, but they have to be very careful. They could still win 23, 24 games and be left out. They really have to be careful here, but I think they do get in. Ole Miss, Mississippi, 19-8, 6-8 in the SEC. First of all, that 6-8 record in conference does not look great, and they have lost 5 of 6. They're 1-5 over their last 6 games. That does not look great. But one thing that Mississippi has done all year is somehow keep games close, and they do. They're very competitive in the SEC. They're only number 75 in the net, and they only have 4 quad 1 and 2 wins. So I think if Ole Miss is going to be saved, it's going to be in these last few weeks, picking up some quality wins and getting past that 20-win plateau and making a nice run in the conference tournament. At this point, I say no, they're not going to make it, but they're a team that can get hot and sneak in if they play well over the next week or two. Texas A&M sits at 15-12, 6-8 in conference. Again, the 12 losses looks very, very bad. Having a losing record in the conference is very critical, and they have lost 4 in a row. But what they do have working for them is 8 quad 1 and 2 wins. They have played a very tough schedule, and their strength of schedule is saving them from falling completely out of the tournament discussion. They do sit at number 58 in the net. That has to improve over the last couple weeks of the season, but they are still in contention because they do have a couple winnable quad 1 games coming up in the last few weeks of the season. In the end, I don't think Texas A&M gets in, but they are an intriguing team that has played a very tough schedule. Moving on to the Big 12, the best conference in college basketball this year. First of all, Oklahoma sits at 19-8, 7-7 in the Big 12 conference. The problems for them, first of all, they are only 6-7 over their last 13 games. And again, the record of 500 in conference does not look great. What they do have look in their favor is that they are number 39 in the net rankings, which is just on the edge of almost being automatic getting in. They also have 7 quad 1 and 2 wins, which is pretty impressive, and they've got some huge games coming up over the next week or two that could definitely improve that. I think in the end, Oklahoma will get in because they have played such a tough schedule, and they're 1 win away from breaking that 20-win plateau. If they can maintain a 500 record in the toughest conference in America, I think they sneak in. Texas, 17-10, 6-8 in the Big 12. Again, the 6-8 record does not look great for them, and they're only 6-8 over their last 14 games overall. They do, however, sit at number 40 in the net, 1 spot behind Oklahoma, and so that puts them right on the edge of looking very solid in the net rankings. And they do have 6 quad 1 and 2 wins. And similar to Oklahoma, they have a lot of chances here in the last few weeks of the season to pick up some really quality wins and solidify their spot in the tournament. And then finally in the Big 12, Cincinnati, 16-11, 5-9 in the Big 12. That 5-9 looks very poor when you look at their overall resume in conference. And over the last 13 games, they've only won 4 times. What they do have working in their favor is, again, the strength of schedule. The conference has been so difficult, and every game is basically a quad 1 or quad 2 type game. They do have 5 quad 1 and 2 wins combined, and they do sit at number 45 in the net rankings. So they do have a chance here over the next couple weeks to make a run and potentially to improve that as well. So of these teams, I think Oklahoma is in. I think Texas gets in. I do not think Cincinnati gets in. I think They are a team, they're up and coming, they're having a great season for them, but I think they're 1 year away from making a run at the NCAA tournament. And then finally, the conundrum that is Gonzaga this year. Gonzaga, the perennial tournament team who has been top 10 almost every season for the last 10 years, sits right now at 22-6, 12-2 overall. They are 11-1 over their last 12, and they are number 21 in the net rankings. So it seems like from that standpoint, you would think that they would be an absolute lock for the NCAA tournament. But their biggest problem is that they only have one quad one win, and that was at Kentucky. They've played a number of quad one teams, but they've lost to all of them. So the question the committee has to ask themselves is, does Gonzaga deserve to get in because they played so many quality teams, even though they only beat one of them? I think Gonzaga does get in because I think they continue to play well at the end of the year. They still have St. Mary's one more time, who's a great team, and that would be a quad one win. And they probably need to beat St. Mary's again in the West Coast Conference tournament. Even if they don't win the tournament, they still have a chance to pick up 2 quad one wins if they beat St. Mary's twice. I think the committee will be favorable to them because of their overall number of wins and because of the road that they've had to take, challenging themselves with so many quality games, even though they did not win all of them. So I just went through 19 teams, and that list will continue to evolve as we go through the year. I will keep you updated on those teams, and I'm sure there will be more as we get closer to the end of the year. But as of right now, that's where we stand with the bubble. Some of those teams will get in, some will not, and I will take a look back once Selection Sunday rolls around to see how my predictions went and if I was correct on which teams get in and which teams get left out. Well, I thank you so much for tuning in this week. I will be back next week with updated results and other topics of interest in college basketball. You all have a good rest of your week. Thank you for listening to the Press Play Podcast Network. To follow us on X, look up Press Play Pods. For sponsorship plans and more information, please email admin@pressplaypodcast.com. And to listen to all our shows and learn more about our network, please visit www.pressplaypodcasts.com.